this issue for 20 years. It's not going to be possible for me to tell you all that might be said about this subject. This is an exercise in self-control that I may not be able to succeed very well in because there's a lot to say. It's also important for you to know that there are important nuances about the studies relative to this subject. Many of them have been repeated in different laboratories, but seldom do those repetitive studies use the same sample of individuals. Sometimes the definition of who is a gay or lesbian person changes somewhat. The statistical treatment of the data is not always uniform. I won't attempt tonight to address all of those subtleties. I've come, I hope, prepared to tell you what I think the big picture is across these many studies. All right, so what's a sexually dimorphic trait? I try to represent that for you in this cartoon. A sexually dimorphic trait is a biological or psychological trait that's different between men and women. And the experiments then have tried to determine whether or not homosexual men, represented here, are atypical for their sex with respect to this kind of a trait. And are homosexual women different than their heterosexual counterparts with regard to a trait known to be different between men and women. So these are the sexually dimorphic traits that we're going to discuss tonight. And the bottom line message at the outset is that homosexual people are atypical for their sex with regard to these kinds of characteristics. Men and women have different hands, and the index for hand biology is the ratio of the index finger to the fourth finger. It's called the 2D to 4D ratio. Notice that for the individual on your left, the index finger is longer, the index finger is longer than the fourth finger. So the ratio is greater than 1. For the individual on the right, the index finger is shorter than the fourth finger, and the ratio of those two is less than 1. That's characteristic of men. A ratio greater than 1, approaching 1 or greater than 1 is characteristic of women. The ratio less than that is characteristic of men. So these are a small part of the data. And I show it only for women. So this figure, stop looking at your hands and look up at This is a study that reported the results of 4 independent inquiries from 4 different laboratories. Both the left and the right hands are represented homosexual individual data on the right, heterosexual on the left. Let's just look at the right hand. So let's compare those 2 numbers, those 2 values, those 2, and those 2. And what you will see is that lesbian women have their hand ratios masculinized. This ratio is known to first make its appearance in the embryo, and it's stable after about 1.5 years. This biological metric is not subject to psychological or sociological change. Nothing that happens in the family alters this characteristic. 3 of these 4 studies show this effect, that this sexually dimorphic trait in women is atypical for their gender. The same thing is true for men. However, it's a little more complicated because some of the studies show that the ratio in homosexual men is masculinized. It's shorter than for heteros. It's smaller than for heterosexual men. Some show that it is feminized. Interestingly, in these studies, the values for the homosexual men is constant from this side of the Atlantic to the other side of the Atlantic, and the difference is in the heterosexual populations. That hasn't been figured out yet. The most recent study that I know from a Finnish study suggests that there may be some ethnic differences. These investigators were not able to see this effect in black or Chinese subjects. There's a difference in handedness. Homosexual people tend to be non-right-handed in comparison to their heterosexual counterparts. I show you the results of a meta-analysis of a large number of studies in which handedness was measured. The results are that, especially for lesbian women, non-right-handedness is greatly increased relative to the heterosexual population. Same with men, but the effect is not as great. Handedness, like finger length, is known to be under the control of exposure to steroid hormones in the embryo. Here's a woman at McFadden's laboratory at the University of Texas at Austin. She has a microphone in her ear, and a recording is being made of the ability of the cochlea in the ear to make noises. The ear just does not hear sounds. The ear can make sounds. Some of these sounds are spontaneous, and some of these sounds are created in response to a little click sound. This woman is being measured for her ability to hear those sounds. The acronym representing the name of these sounds is OAE. Let's not belabor the longer name. Lesbian women are masculinized with respect to their ability in this aspect of hearing. Gay men are not affected. So if we look at the 2 figures, the top one is for the spontaneous noises in the cochlea. The bottom one is for the noises elicited by the click stimulus. Here are the women over on the heterosexual females at the extreme left, heterosexual males at the extreme right. If you look at these 3 columns in either the top or the bottom panel, you see that gay and bisexual men are not different than heterosexual men. But gay and bisexual women are different than their heterosexual counterparts. Now there are 2 other aspects of hearing that deserve brief attention. It's possible to measure other aspects of hearing by putting